What would you do if a stranger walked into your life at midnight and begged you to become his wife for 2 weeks? Rain hammered against the windows of the small cafe, each drop a percussion against glass that seemed to echo the rhythm of Sienna's exhaustion. She dragged a damp cloth across the last table, her shoulders aching from a 12-hour shift that had started before dawn. The clock on the wall read 11:47. 13 minutes until she could lock the door, walk 3 blocks to her apartment, and collapse into bed before doing it all over again tomorrow. The bell above the door chimed. Sienna didn't look up immediately. Late-night stragglers weren't uncommon, drunk college students looking for coffee to sober up, insomniacs seeking human company, the occasional homeless person hoping for warmth. She'd learned to read them within seconds, to know who would cause trouble and who just needed kindness. But when she finally raised her eyes, the man standing in the doorway didn't fit any category she knew. Water streamed from his tailored suit, charcoal gray, probably worth more than 6 months of her rent. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead, and his chest rose and fell like he'd been running. Not from the rain. From something else. Something that made his hands shake as he gripped the door frame. Their eyes met. His were desperate. Sienna's fingers tightened around the cloth. Every instinct screamed at her to be careful, to keep the counter between them, to remember that she was alone in this place with a stranger who looked like he was either about to break down or explode. He took a step forward. Then another. His expensive shoes left wet prints on the tile she'd just mopped. When he spoke, his voice cracked in a way that made her heart lurch despite herself. Please. I need your help. Sienna straightened, forcing her expression into something neutral. Professional. She'd dealt with desperate men before. Men who thought a woman working alone was an opportunity, men who mistook exhaustion for weakness. We're closed, she said, keeping her tone flat. There's another cafe 2 streets over that stays open until 1. He shook his head and something in the motion made her pause. It wasn't aggressive. It was the gesture of someone drowning, someone reaching for anything that might keep them afloat. I don't need coffee. He took another step closer, and now she could see his face clearly under the harsh lighting. Mid-30s maybe. Sharp jawline softened by stubble. Eyes that carried the kind of pain you couldn't fake. I need you to pretend to be my wife. The words hung in the air between them, so absurd that for a moment Sienna thought she'd misheard. She blinked. Processed. Felt a laugh building in her chest, the kind that comes from shock rather than humor. Excuse me? He moved to the nearest table and gripped the back of a chair, knuckles white. When he spoke again, the words tumbled out in a rush, like if he didn't say everything now he'd lose his nerve. My daughter's birthday is tomorrow. She's 7. For months she's been asking where her mother is, why she doesn't come to school events, why she's not there when she wakes up from nightmares. His voice broke completely on the last word. I can't tell her the truth anymore. I can't watch her face when I explain again that her mother isn't coming back. So I told her. I told her that her mom was away working, but that she'd be home for her birthday. Sienna's grip on the cloth loosened. She should tell him to leave. Should point out that whatever crisis he was having, whatever elaborate scheme he was proposing, she wanted no part of it. But there was something in his voice, a rawness that bypassed all her defenses and went straight to the place inside her that still remembered being a child, still remembered waiting for someone who never came home. Who are you? She asked quietly. Callum Thorne. He said it like the name should mean something. When her expression didn't change, something that might have been relief flickered across his face. I'll pay you. $50,000 for 2 weeks. All you have to do is come to her birthday party tomorrow, smile, let her believe you're her mother for a little while. Just long enough for her to have one happy birthday. $50,000. The number ricocheted around Sienna's skull. That was her student loans. That was a year of not choosing between groceries and art supplies. That was breathing room in a life where she'd forgotten what breathing felt like. But it was also insane. She set down the cloth and crossed her arms, studying him. Looking for the con, the angle, the moment where this would reveal itself as something dangerous or predatory. Why me? You could hire an actress. Someone professional. I tried. His laugh was bitter. Do you know what casting agencies say when a single father asks them to provide someone to pretend to be his dead wife for his daughter's birthday? They hang up. Or worse, they report you to social services. I'm out of options and out of time. He met her eyes again, and the desperation there was so palpable she could almost taste it. I saw you through the window a week ago. You were reading to a little girl while her mother was at the counter. The way you smiled at her, the way you made her laugh. My daughter hasn't laughed like that since. He couldn't finish the sentence. Sienna's throat tightened. She remembered that day. The little girl had been bored and fussy, and Sienna had pulled out an old picture book from behind the counter, done silly voices until the child giggled. It had been nothing. A small kindness in a world that offered few enough. But to this man it had been everything. "Your wife," Sienna said carefully. "How did she die?" The question was intrusive, inappropriate. But if she was going to even consider this madness, she needed to know what she was stepping into. Callum's jaw worked. "Cancer. 3 years ago. Ivy was 4. Old enough to remember her, but not old enough to understand why she's gone." His hand moved to his jacket pocket, pulled out a phone. He tapped the screen and turned it toward Sienna. The photo showed a little girl with dark curls and enormous brown eyes. She was holding a stuffed rabbit, and her smile was hesitant, like she'd forgotten how to do it properly. Something in Sienna's chest cracked. "I know what I'm asking is wrong," Callum said, voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "I know it's a lie and lies hurt her. But the truth is killing her. Every day she asks about her mother is another day I watch my daughter's light dim a little more. I just want to give her one day where she feels like other kids. One birthday where she's not the girl whose mother is gone." Sienna looked away from the phone, from those sad brown eyes that reminded her too much of her own reflection at 7 years old. Her gaze drifted to the window, where rain continued its relentless assault on glass, where her own face stared back at her, tired, worn, alone. What would you do if someone offered you a chance to be needed? To matter? "I need the night," she heard herself say. "To think about it." Relief flooded Callum's features so completely that he swayed on his feet. He fumbled for his wallet, pulled out a business card that he set carefully on the table between them. "My number. Call me by noon tomorrow. Please." He turned to leave, and Sienna watched him go, watched the way his shoulders curved inward like a man trying to protect something fragile inside himself. The bell chimed again as he pulled open the door. "Mr. Thorne." He stopped, half-turned. "Why tomorrow? Why can't you push the party back, give yourself more time to find someone?" His smile was the saddest thing she'd ever seen. "Because I already pushed it back twice. She's asked me every morning for 3 weeks if today is the day her mother comes home. I can't do it to her again." Then he was gone, swallowed by rain and darkness, leaving nothing but wet footprints and a business card that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Sienna stood motionless in the empty cafe, her reflection ghostly in the window. Somewhere in the city, a little girl was sleeping, dreaming of a birthday where her mother would finally come home. Somewhere else, a desperate father was probably breaking down in his car, knowing he'd just humiliated himself in front of a stranger. And here, in this quiet space between midnight and morning, Sienna felt the foundations of her carefully controlled life begin to tremble. She picked up the business card, turned it over in her fingers. The embossed lettering caught the light. Callum Thorne, Chief Executive Officer, Thorne Industries. $50,000. One little girl's birthday. 2 weeks of pretending. What could possibly go wrong? The question followed her home through rain-slicked streets, up 3 flights of stairs to an apartment barely large enough to breathe in. It whispered through her mind as she lay in bed, staring at water stains on the ceiling that looked like continents she'd never see. Sleep didn't come. Instead, memories rose like ghosts from the deep places where she'd buried them. She was 7 years old again, sitting on a worn couch, watching the door. Her father was asleep in his chair, empty bottles on the floor around him. Her mother had said she was going to the store. That had been 6 hours ago. She was 10, wearing a dress her father had bought for the school concert. Too big in the shoulders, too short in the hem, but he'd tried. She scanned the audience twice during her solo, looking for her mother's face. Found only empty seats and other people's families. She was 15, getting her first gallery showing at a local coffee shop. 20 amateur paintings from the high school art program. Her father had promised to come. He'd died 3 weeks earlier, liver failure. She stood next to her paintings alone, watching other kids celebrate with their parents, and understood with crystalline clarity that some kinds of loneliness don't have cures. What would it have meant to have someone show up? To have a mother who stayed? At 3 in the morning, Sienna reached for her phone. Stared at the business card she'd propped against her lamp. Her thumb hovered over the keypad. One call could change everything. Or ruin everything. The line between the two had never felt thinner. She set the phone down. Picked it up again. Set it down. At dawn, she made coffee and watched the sun paint her tiny apartment in shades of gold that almost made it beautiful. Her phone sat on the counter, silent and accusing. At 11:45, 15 minutes before his deadline, she dialed. He answered on the first ring. "I'll do it." The words came out steadier than she felt. "But I have conditions." Pause. Then, voice thick with emotion, anything. I want to meet her before the party. Just for a few minutes. If she doesn't take to me, if I can't make her smile, the deal's off and you find someone else. Deal. And I want your word that this ends in 2 weeks. No extensions, no pushing boundaries. We walk away clean. You have it. Sienna closed her eyes. Felt the world tilt on its axis. Text me the address. She ended the call before he could hear the tremor that had crept into her voice. What have I done? 3 hours later, she stood outside a mansion that looked like it belonged in a magazine spread. Wrought iron gates, manicured hedges, windows that reflected clouds like mirrors. A different universe from the cracked sidewalks and graffitied walls of her neighborhood. The gate opened before she could press the call button. Callum was waiting at the front door, and in daylight he looked both more and less than he had the night before. More human, the expensive suit replaced by jeans and a simple button-down. Less imposing, without the desperate energy that had propelled him through the rain, he seemed almost uncertain. Thank you for coming. He stepped aside to let her enter. The inside of the house matched the outside, beautiful, expensive, cold. Marble floors that echoed her footsteps. Art on the walls that probably cost more than her annual salary. Everything in its place, everything perfect. Everything except the small pair of sneakers kicked off by the stairs. The child's drawing taped to the refrigerator visible through an open kitchen door. The stuffed rabbit, the same one from the photo, sitting on the third stair like someone had been in the middle of carrying it upstairs and forgotten. Signs of life. Signs of a child living in a museum. She's in her room, Callum said quietly. I told her I had a surprise. She thinks it's a puppy. Sienna's stomach twisted. And when I walk in instead? I'll tell her the puppy got delayed, but someone even better wanted to say hello. He ran a hand through his hair and she saw it shake. I know that's not much of a plan. I've been awake for 48 hours and I'm running on fear and hope at this point. There was something disarmingly honest about the admission. Something that made Sienna's careful shields waver. Show me her room. They climbed the stairs in silence. The second floor was just as pristine as the first, but here there were more signs of disruption. A closed door with a construction paper sign reading Ivy's Kingdom in crayon. Stickers on the wall spelling out letters. A height chart marked with careful dates. Callum stopped in front of the door, his hand on the knob. For a moment he didn't move, just stood there with his head bowed, shoulders tight with tension. If this doesn't work, he said softly, if she doesn't believe it or you can't, I just want you to know I understand. This is asking the impossible. Sienna looked at him, really looked. Saw the sleepless shadows under his eyes, the stubble from a morning where shaving must have seemed unimportant, the way his free hand clenched and unclenched at his side. She'd thought last night that he was desperate. Now she understood it went deeper. He was drowning. Had been drowning for 3 years. And this was his last gasp at the surface. Open the door, she said. He did. The room beyond was an explosion of color in a house of monochrome. Pink walls covered in drawings. A bed shaped like a castle. Toys organized in bins but spilling over because there were too many to contain. A bookshelf groaning under the weight of picture books and chapter books and everything in between. And in the middle of it all, sitting on a rug shaped like a butterfly, was Ivy. She looked up as they entered and Sienna's breath caught. The photo hadn't done her justice. In person, those brown eyes were enormous, fringed with dark lashes. Her curls were wild, escaping from a ponytail that had clearly been done hours ago. She wore overalls covered in paint stains and clutched a worn stuffed rabbit to her chest. Daddy? Her voice was small, uncertain. Where's the puppy? Callum knelt, bringing himself to her level. His voice when he spoke was gentle, careful, like he was defusing a bomb. The puppy had to wait a little longer, sweetheart. But someone very special wanted to meet you before your birthday tomorrow. Is that okay? Ivy's gaze shifted to Sienna. Studied her with the unblinking intensity only children possess. Sienna felt that look go through her like an X-ray, seeing things she tried to hide even from herself. Then Ivy tilted her head and her bottom lip trembled. Are you my mama? The question landed like a physical blow. Sienna's throat closed. Every word of the carefully planned script she'd rehearsed on the drive over evaporated. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only stare at this child who was asking the one question that would either save her or destroy her. Behind her, she heard Callum's sharp intake of breath. Felt the weight of his desperation pressing against her back like a physical thing. This was the moment. The choice that would change everything or change nothing. Sienna walked forward slowly. Knelt on the butterfly rug. Met those impossibly hopeful eyes. Yes, she whispered. I'm home, sweetheart. 4-3 heartbeats, nothing happened. Ivy just stared, rabbit clutched tight, eyes searching Sienna's face for something: truth, lies, hope, disappointment. Then her face crumpled and she launched herself forward. Small arms wrapped around Sienna's neck with desperate strength. The stuffed rabbit squashed between them. And Ivy sobbed, not the quiet, contained crying of a child who'd learned to hide pain, but the raw, gulping sobs of someone who'd been holding grief inside for so long that its release was almost violent. You came back, Ivy choked out between sobs. You came back, Daddy said you would and you did. Over the child's shoulder, Sienna saw Callum standing frozen in the doorway. Tears streamed down his face unchecked. His hand covered his mouth, and his whole body shook with the force of what he was witnessing. Sienna held Ivy tighter, one hand cradling the back of her head, the other rubbing circles on her small back. Tears burned in her own eyes, but she blinked them away. She couldn't cry. Not yet. This child needed her to be strong. I'm here, she murmured. I'm right here. It took 10 minutes for Ivy's sobs to quiet into hiccups. Another 5 for her to loosen her death grip enough to pull back and look at Sienna's face again. You're really real? She asked, voice hoarse. Not a dream. Sienna forced a smile. Reached up to tuck a curl behind Ivy's ear. I'm really real. Where were you? The question was inevitable. Terrifying. Sienna glanced at Callum, who looked like he might pass out from the tension. I was working far away, she said carefully. But I missed you every single day. And I couldn't miss your birthday for anything in the world. Ivy studied her face for another long moment. Then, apparently satisfied with what she saw, she smiled. The transformation was stunning, from devastation to joy in an instant, the way only children can manage. Want to see my drawings? I made you one every week. Daddy saved them all. Before Sienna could respond, Ivy grabbed her hand and tugged her toward a corner where papers were stacked in neat piles. Each pile labeled with a month in careful adult handwriting, Callum's organizational system, clearly trying to preserve something for a mother who wasn't there. As Ivy chattered about her drawings, pointing out details and telling elaborate stories about each one, Sienna felt reality settling around her like a weight. This wasn't a 2-week arrangement. This wasn't a simple transaction. This was a child's heart she was holding. Fragile. Desperate. Already scarred from loss. And in 2 weeks she would have to walk away and shatter it all over again. Behind her, she heard Callum leave the room quietly. When she glanced back, he was gone. Probably falling apart in private, probably trying to process the fact that his insane gamble had actually worked. But later, as evening fell and Callum insisted she stay for dinner so Ivy wouldn't be suspicious, Sienna found herself in the kitchen while Ivy washed her hands upstairs. Callum stood at the counter, his back to her, shoulders rigid. I saw your expression in there, he said quietly. When Ivy asked if you were real, Sienna said nothing. He turned and his face was stripped of all pretense. Bro, I know what we're doing is wrong. I know that in 2 weeks when you leave she's going to be devastated. But 3 years of grief had already devastated her. At least now she'll have had 2 weeks of believing her mother came back. 2 weeks of being happy. His voice cracked. Is that selfish? Choosing her short-term happiness over her long-term pain. The question hung between them, honest, agonizing. I don't know, Sienna admitted. But I made the choice to walk through that door. So whatever happens next, we're in it together. Something passed between them in that moment. Not attraction, not yet. But recognition. 2 people standing at the edge of something they didn't understand, knowing it was too late to turn back. The sound of small feet on stairs broke the spell. Mama. Come see my birthday dress. Sienna took a breath. Forced a smile. Turned toward the doorway where Ivy appeared, holding a pink dress with such pride that it hurt to look at. It's beautiful, she said, meaning it. That night, after Ivy had finally fallen asleep, after 3 bedtime stories, 2 glasses of water and endless questions about what they'd do tomorrow, Sienna found Callum on the terrace. He stood at the railing, staring out at the city lights spread below like fallen stars. A glass of whiskey dangled from his fingers, mostly untouched. She hesitated in the doorway. Hadn't planned to seek him out. But something pulled her forward. Maybe the weight of the lie they were building, maybe the need to share it with someone who understood. Couldn't sleep? He asked without turning. Is it that obvious? I haven't slept in 3 years. He took a small sip of the whiskey. You get used to it. Sienna moved to stand beside him, leaving careful distance between them. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of jasmine from somewhere in the garden below. Your wife, she said carefully. What was her name? His hand tightened on the glass. For a long moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Lorelei. The name came out like a prayer. She was brilliant, funny, could light up a room just by walking into it. He paused. When she got sick, she made me promise I'd move on. Find someone else. Give Ivy a mother who could actually be there for her. You couldn't do it. I tried. Dated a few times. But every woman I met, all I could see was the ways they weren't her. The ways they fell short. He finally turned to look at Sienna. And then I realized I wasn't looking for a new wife. I was looking for someone who could make my daughter smile the way she used to. Someone who could give her back the parts of childhood that grief stole. Sienna's throat tightened. And you thought I could do that? I saw you with that little girl in the cafe. You weren't performing for tips or trying to get her mother to order more. You genuinely cared that this random child was bored and unhappy. His eyes held hers. That kind of kindness, you can't fake it. And it's exactly what Ivy needs. The honesty in his voice did something dangerous to Sienna's carefully maintained walls. She looked away, focusing on the city lights rather than the man beside her who was suddenly too real, too human. My mother left when I was Ivy's age, she heard herself say. Just walked out one day and never came back. My father tried, but he was drowning in his own grief. By the time I was 10, I was the one taking care of him. By 15, he was gone too. Callum said nothing. Just listened. So when you asked me to pretend to be Ivy's mother, I said yes because I know what it's like to be her. To lie in bed at night and wonder if you did something wrong. If you were the reason your mother couldn't love you enough to stay. She finally met his eyes again. But here's what you need to understand, I'm not doing this for the money. I'm doing it because no child should feel the way I felt. And if I can give Ivy 2 weeks of believing she matters, of believing her mother came back, then maybe some part of that broken little girl inside me can heal too. The silence that followed felt sacred, heavy with shared pain and desperate hope. She called you Mama, Callum said softly. I know. Not even hesitated. Just accepted you completely. I know. And in 2 weeks when you leave. Don't. Sienna cut him off. Don't think about that yet. We have a birthday tomorrow. Let's just focus on tomorrow. But even as she said it, she felt the countdown starting. 14 days until she walked away. 14 days until Ivy's heart broke again. 14 days to pretend it being something real. Can 2 broken people create healing for a child? Or will this desperate arrangement destroy all 3 of them? The questions followed Sienna home that night. Followed her through fitful sleep and anxious morning. Followed her as she returned to the mansion the next day, wearing a dress she'd borrowed from a coworker because everything she owned screamed, struggling artist rather than CEO's wife. The birthday party was in 4 hours. 4 hours to cement the lie. 4 hours to convince a house full of wealthy strangers that she belonged in Callum Thorne's world. 4 hours to make one little girl believe her mother had finally come home. Morning light filtered through the kitchen windows, painting everything in shades of gold that felt almost cruel in their beauty. Sienna stood at the counter, her hands wrapped around a coffee mug she hadn't yet drunk from, watching Ivy draw elaborate pictures on her pancakes with syrup while chattering about a dream she'd had. And then the dragon turned into a butterfly and we flew all the way to the moon. And Mama, did you know that the moon is made of cheese? Tommy at school said so, but I think he's wrong because how would the astronauts eat it all? The word Mama still sent a jolt through Sienna's chest every time. 3 days since the birthday party, 3 days of playing house in a world that wasn't hers, and she still hadn't gotten used to it. Wasn't sure she ever would. Callum entered the kitchen and Sienna's awareness of him was immediate and unwelcome. He'd showered, his hair still damp, wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. But it was his eyes that caught her, the way they found her first before Ivy, before anything else in the room. The same way hers had found him. They'd been avoiding this. The morning after awkwardness of the birthday party, where they'd held hands for the guests, where he'd wrapped his arm around her waist and she'd leaned into him because that's what couples did. Where the pretending had felt dangerously close to not pretending at all. Coffee? She heard herself ask, her voice steadier than she felt. Please. They moved at the same time, reaching for the coffee pot. Their hands collided, his warm, hers trembling slightly from exhaustion she couldn't shake. The touch lasted barely a second before they both jerked back, but the electricity of it lingered, humming in the space between them. Ivy, oblivious, kept talking about moon cheese and butterfly dragons. Callum cleared his throat. Poured his coffee with careful precision, like it required his full concentration. I have to go to the office today. Emergency meeting with the board. Ivy's face fell instantly. But you promised we'd go to the park.
I know, sweetheart. I'm sorry.
But Mama's here and she can take you. He glanced at Sienna, and something in his expression asked a question he couldn't voice in front of his daughter.
Sienna nodded. We'll have fun.
Maybe we can bake those cookies you keep talking about? The transformation in Ivy was immediate, from disappointment to joy in a heartbeat. She launched herself at Sienna, syrup-sticky hands and all, wrapping around her waist.
Really?
The chocolate chip ones with the rainbow sprinkles?
Absolutely.
Over Ivy's head, Sienna met Callum's eyes again. Saw gratitude there and something else. Something that made her stomach flip in a way that had nothing to do with the strong coffee or her empty stomach. He left 20 minutes later and the house exhaled. Became less tense, more lived in. Ivy dragged Sienna through her morning routine. Getting dressed, brushing teeth, arguing about whether ponytails or braids were better for baking. Normal things. Family things. Things that were breaking Sienna's heart even as they healed something inside her she hadn't known was broken. They baked cookies. Made a mess of the pristine kitchen, flour everywhere, chocolate chips stolen more than added to the batter. Ivy laughed, a sound like bells, like hope, and Sienna found herself laughing too genuinely for the first time in longer than she could remember. After the cookies they painted. Ivy set up her easel in the sunroom, and Sienna joined her with supplies Callum had clearly bought but never used. They painted side by side, Ivy creating elaborate fantasy worlds while Sienna found her hands moving almost unconsciously, sketching the outline of a little girl with wild curls and paint-stained fingers. "You're really good," Ivy said, leaning over to look at Sienna's canvas. "Like really, really good. Better than my art teacher. You're pretty amazing yourself. Do you think Daddy would like a painting for his office? He only has boring stuff on the walls there." The casual mention of Callum made something in Sienna's chest tighten. "I think he'd love anything you made him." "What about something you made?" The question was innocent, but it carved through Sienna's defenses like a knife. Because in 2 weeks, less now 11 days, she'd be gone. And whatever she left behind would be just another reminder to Callum of the elaborate lie they'd built. "Maybe," she said, forcing lightness into her tone. "Let's finish yours first." They were cleaning up paint supplies when Sienna heard the front door open. Too early for Callum to be back. His meetings usually ran hours. She glanced at the clock. Only 2 in the afternoon. Footsteps in the hallway. Then he appeared in the doorway of the sunroom and Sienna's breath caught. He'd loosened his tie, rolled up his sleeves. But it wasn't his appearance that stopped her, it was his expression. The way he looked at them, at her and Ivy covered in paint and cookie crumbs, laughing in the afternoon light. The way his face softened into something that looked almost like peace. "You're home early," she said. Meeting ended faster than expected. But he didn't move from the doorway. Just stood there, drinking in the scene like a man dying of thirst. Ivy noticed him then. "Daddy? Look what Mama and I made." She grabbed her painting, a family of 3 holding hands under a rainbow, and thrust it toward him. Callum knelt to examine it with the seriousness it deserved. "This is incredible, Ivy Bean. Is this us?" "Yeah. You and Mama and me. We're going to the park, see? And there's ice cream and puppies and everything." His hand trembled slightly as he took the painting. "I love it. We'll hang it in my office, right where I can see it every day." The joy on Ivy's face was blinding. But when Callum stood and his eyes met Sienna's over his daughter's head, what she saw there wasn't joy. It was longing. Raw and aching and terrifying in its intensity. That night, after Ivy had fallen asleep clutching her stuffed rabbit and whispering about tomorrow's adventures, Sienna found herself unable to settle. She paced her guest room, trying to ignore the sound of Callum's footsteps in his own room down the hall. Trying not to think about what Ivy had said at dinner. "Daddy, why don't you smile at Mama like you used to smile at her picture?" The question had landed like a grenade. Callum had frozen, fork halfway to his mouth. Sienna had felt her face flush, suddenly too aware of every glance between them, every accidental touch throughout the day. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Callum had asked carefully. "The picture in your office. Of her. You always look at it and smile, but it's a sad smile. But when you look at Mama now, you don't smile at all. You just stare. Like you're trying to figure out a really hard puzzle." Out of the mouths of children came truths adults spent years avoiding. Callum had deflected, changed the subject, but the words hung in the air between him and Sienna for the rest of the meal. Hung between them now, even through walls and closed doors. She was an imposter in a dead woman's place. A fake wearing a real person's life like borrowed clothes that didn't quite fit. And Callum was starting to look at her like she belonged there. The charity gala came too quickly. 4 days into their arrangement, and Sienna still hadn't mastered walking in heels or making small talk with people who wore watches worth more than cars. The dress Callum had bought her, insisted on buying after seeing her trying to make her borrowed one work, fit perfectly. Midnight blue silk that made her feel like someone else entirely. Someone who belonged on his arm. The venue was stunning. Old money and new power mingling under crystal chandeliers. Sienna felt every eye on them as they entered, felt the weight of judgment and curiosity. Callum's hand rested on the small of her back, warm through the thin silk, and she tried to remember that this was for show. All for show. "You're trembling," he murmured close to her ear. "I'm terrified." "Don't be. You're the most beautiful woman here." The words sent heat through her that had nothing to do with the crowded room. She risked a glance up at him, found him looking at her with something in his eyes that made her heart stutter. Then a voice cut through the moment like glass shattering. "Callum Thorne. I'd heard rumors you'd resurfaced from your cave of grief, but I didn't believe them." The woman who appeared before them was stunning in a way that made Sienna feel instantly inadequate. Tall, polished, wearing a red dress that probably cost more than Sienna's entire wardrobe. But it was the familiarity in her smile, the way she touched Callum's arm without hesitation, that made Sienna's stomach drop. Callum's entire body had gone rigid. "Celeste. It's been what, 5 years?" Her eyes, sharp, calculating, slid to Sienna. "And you must be the mysterious wife. How fascinating. Callum and I were engaged once, you know. Before he met Lorelei." The name of his dead wife hung in the air like a curse. "Nice to meet you," Sienna managed, her voice sounding distant even to her own ears. "Oh, I'm sure." Celeste's smile was razor-sharp. "Callum darling, we simply must catch up. It's been far too long." And just like that she monopolized him. Drew him into conversations with mutual acquaintances, reminisced about shared history Sienna had no part in. Callum tried to include her, kept glancing over like he was checking she was still there, but Celeste was relentless. A force of nature in designer heels. Sienna stood at the edge of their circle, invisible. Not because they were deliberately excluding her, though Celeste certainly was, but because she didn't belong. Didn't have the shared history, the cultural references, the easy confidence that came from growing up in this world. She was a stranger in borrowed silk, playing a part she was desperately underqualified for. After 20 minutes that felt like hours, she excused herself. Murmured something about needing air that no one really heard. Made her way through the crowd to the balcony, where the night air hit her face like a blessing. She gripped the railing, breathing deeply, trying to remember why she'd agreed to this insanity. $50,000. A little girl's smile. A father's desperate hope. None of it felt worth this hollow ache in her chest, this feeling of being erased. Rough night? She turned to find a man standing a few feet away, holding 2 champagne flutes. Mid-40s, expensive suit, kind eyes. He offered her one of the glasses. That obvious? Only to someone who's also hiding out here. He smiled. "Gavin Ross. And you must be Callum Thorne's mysterious wife everyone's talking about." She took the champagne, needing something to do with her hands. "Is it that obvious I don't belong here?" "Not at all. You look like you belong anywhere you choose to be. It's everyone else who seems to be trying too hard." The compliment was smooth, probably practiced, but after 20 minutes of feeling invisible, Sienna couldn't help but soften slightly. They talked, easy conversation about nothing important, and slowly the tightness in her chest began to ease. She didn't notice Callum until he was suddenly there, materializing beside her with an intensity that made Gavin take a step back. "She's my wife." The words came out clipped, possessive, nothing like his usual measured tone. Gavin raised his hands in surrender. "Just making conversation, Thorne. No harm intended." He left quickly, and suddenly Sienna was alone with Callum on the balcony, the party continuing inside like a distant dream. "What was that?" she asked quietly. "What was what?" "The way you just," she gestured helplessly. "He was just being nice." "He was flirting with you. So what if he was? This isn't real, remember? Or have you forgotten that part?" Callum's jaw worked. In the dim light, his eyes were dark, unreadable. "I haven't forgotten anything." "Then why did you act like—" She stopped herself, took a breath. "You were busy with Celeste." "I was bored." He offered conversation. "That's all it was." "He touched your arm." "So did half the people in there during introductions. Are you going to challenge them all to a duel?" "You're my wife." "I'm not your wife." The words came out sharper than she intended, loud enough to make a couple near the doorway glance over. She lowered her voice. I'm an employee. A temporary solution to your problem. Don't confuse the performance with reality. Something flashed in Callum's eyes, hurt maybe or anger. He moved closer and she could smell his cologne, feel the heat of him in the cool night air. Is that what this is to you? A performance? Her heart hammered against her ribs. What else would it be? He didn't answer. Just stared at her with an intensity that made it hard to breathe, made her aware of every inch of space between them and how easily it could disappear. The car ride home was suffocating in its silence. Callum drove with both hands on the wheel, knuckles white. Sienna stared out the window, watching the city blur past, feeling everything and nothing all at once. They were almost back to the mansion when he finally spoke. Why did you let him touch you? The question hung in the air, quiet but weighted with something that made Sienna's throat tight. Why do you care? She shot back. This isn't real, remember? His hands tightened on the wheel. You keep saying that. Like if you say it enough times, it'll make it true. It is true. We signed a contract. 2 weeks. Then I leave. That was the deal. Deals change. Not this one. She forced steel into her voice even as something inside her cracked. In 8 days I walk away. You find someone real to build a life with. Ivy learns that people leave but life goes on. And I go back to being nobody from nowhere. Callum pulled into the driveway but didn't turn off the engine. Just sat there staring straight ahead. You're not nobody. To your world I am. To people like Celeste I'm exactly nobody. Did you see the way she looked at me? Like I was something that crawled in on your shoe. I don't care what Celeste thinks. But you care what your sister thinks. What the board thinks. What everyone in your life thinks. She turned to face him fully. I'm a complication you can explain away in 2 weeks. Don't pretend I'm more than that. He turned off the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. What if I want you to be more than that? The words landed like a physical blow. Sienna's breath caught, her mind scrambling for a response that didn't exist. Callum. What if I don't want you to leave in 8 days? What if? Don't? She cut him off, hand on the door handle. Don't say things you'll regret when you remember I'm just the woman you hired to lie to your daughter. She got out of the car before he could respond. Made it 3 steps toward the house before his hand caught her wrist, gentle but insistent. She turned, and the look on his face destroyed every defense she'd built. I'm not going to regret anything, he said quietly. The only thing I regret is that I met you like this. That I had to hire you instead of. He trailed off, shook his head. You're right. This is fake. But what I feel when I look at you, that's the realest thing I've felt in 3 years. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. Callum, please don't do this. Do what? Tell you the truth? Tell me things that make it harder to leave. Her voice broke on the last word. His thumb traced circles on her wrist, and she hated how much she wanted to lean into the touch. Hated how her body betrayed everything her mind knew to be true. Maybe leaving isn't the only option, he said. It's the only option that makes sense. You hired me for 2 weeks. 2 weeks to give Ivy a happy birthday and a few good memories. Not to, she couldn't finish the sentence. Not to what? Not to make me fall in, she stopped herself, horrified. Pulled her wrist free and took a step back. I need to go inside. But he'd heard it. The thing she hadn't meant to say. The truth that had been growing inside her like a dangerous flower since that first night when Ivy had asked if she was her mama. Sienna. She shook her head, tears burning behind her eyes. Turned toward the house. He caught up to her at the door. Spun her around, and before she could protest, before she could think, his mouth was on hers. The kiss was nothing like she'd imagined. Desperate and raw and tasting like 3 years of grief and loneliness finding sudden air. His hands cupped her face like she was something precious, something that might shatter if he held too tight. And she kissed him back. Gave in to the thing she'd been fighting since that first moment in the cafe when he'd begged her with broken words and desperate eyes. Poured into it everything she couldn't say, that she'd already fallen, that leaving would destroy her, that this was the most idiotic thing she'd ever done and she didn't care. Then reality crashed in like cold water. She pulled away gasping. Stared at him with horror and longing warring in her chest. We can't do this. Sienna. No. No, we can't. Ivy's upstairs. Your daughter. The one we're lying to. The one who's going to be devastated in 8 days when I leave. She pressed her hands to her face, felt tears sliding between her fingers. This is exactly what we can't do. Then stay. I can't. Why not? Because I'm not real. The words came out as a sob. I'm not her mother. I'm not your wife. I'm a temporary band-aid on a wound that needs real healing. And the longer I stay, the worse it's going to hurt when the truth comes out. Callum looked like she'd struck him.
The truth. Right.
Because that's not truth. It's a lie we both needed to believe for different reasons.
But it's still a lie.
She turned and ran inside before he could see her completely fall apart. Took the stairs 2 at a time, locked herself in the guest room, and slid down the door until she was sitting on the floor, knees to chest, trying to muffle the sobs that wanted to tear out of her. Outside the door, she heard his footsteps.
Heard him stop.
Heard him press his hand against the wood. She couldn't see it but she knew she felt it, and then his voice, barely audible.
I'm not sorry I kissed you. And I'm not sorry I want you to stay.
She squeezed her eyes shut.
Said nothing.
After a long moment, his footsteps retreated. A door closed somewhere down the hall. And Sienna sat on the floor of a guest room in a mansion that would never be hers, crying for something she'd known from the start she couldn't keep. The next morning arrived with the weight of dread. Sienna hadn't slept. Had heard Callum pacing in his room until 3 a.m. When she finally dragged herself downstairs, she found Ivy at the kitchen table but no Callum. Daddy left early, Ivy said around a mouthful of cereal.
He said he had important work stuff. But he looked sad.
Did you guys fight? The question was so direct, so honest, that Sienna felt her carefully constructed lies crumble a little more. Grown-ups sometimes disagree about things, she said carefully. But it's nothing for you to worry about. Ivy studied her with those 2 knowing eyes. My friend Harper's parents fight all the time. Then her mom moved out. You're not going to move out, are you? The words were a knife between Sienna's ribs.
Ivy.
Because I really like having you here. You make Daddy smile for real. And you braid my hair better than he does. And you don't burn the pancakes. Every word was another weight on Sienna's chest. Another reason this had been a terrible idea from the start. Let's not worry about that right now, she said, hating herself for the deflection. How about we do something fun today? But fun felt impossible when she could feel the countdown ticking in her chest. 7 days left. 7 days before everything fell apart. The call came 3 days later while Sienna and Ivy were playing in the garden. Callum's phone, which he'd left on the kitchen counter, lit up with a name that made Sienna's blood run cold.
Vivian. She didn't answer it. Wasn't her place.
But 15 minutes later, Callum's sister was at the door, her expression cold enough to freeze fire. Where's my brother?
Vivian demanded. At work.
I can have him call you. I'm not here for him. I'm here for you. The words were delivered with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. Sienna felt her stomach drop. Vivian pushed past her into the house, her heels clicking sharply on the marble.
We need to talk. Privately.
Unless you want Ivy to hear exactly who and what you really are. Sienna glanced toward the garden where Ivy was still playing, oblivious. Then followed Vivian into the study, closing the door behind them. Vivian turned, and the look on her face was pure venom.
I know everything. The cafe. The deal.
The $50,000. The room tilted. Sienna grabbed the edge of the desk to steady herself.
How?
I hired an investigator. Did you really think I wouldn't? A woman appears out of nowhere claiming to be my brother's wife, and I'm just supposed to accept it. Vivian's laugh was bitter.
You're a fraud.
A hired actress playing dress-up in a life that isn't yours. It's not like that. Then what is it like? Explain to me how taking money to pretend to be a dead woman is anything other than grotesque. I'm not pretending to be her.
I'm just...
lying to a traumatized child?
Yes, I'm aware.
My brother has made many stupid decisions since Lorelai died, but this... She gestured at Sienna with disgust. This is beyond reckless. This is cruel. He's trying to help his daughter. He's trying to avoid dealing with reality. And you're enabling him because the price was right. The accusation hit like a slap. You don't know anything about me or why I agreed to this. I know you're a struggling artist working minimum wage jobs. I know $50,000 would seem like a fortune to someone like you. I know you saw a desperate man and an opportunity. That's not... Sienna stopped herself. Because wasn't it true? Hadn't money been part of her initial motivation? But somewhere along the way it had stopped being about money. Had become about a little girl's laugh and a broken man's hope and the terrifying realization that she'd fallen in love with both of them. Leave, Vivian said.
Today.
Before you do any more damage.
I can't just leave. Ivy.
Ivy will be devastated when the truth comes out regardless of when you go. But at least if you leave now, the damage is limited. Stay longer and you're just being selfish. What about what Callum wants? My brother doesn't know what he wants. He's been drowning in grief for 3 years. You're not a life raft. You're just another weight pulling him under. Sienna felt tears burning behind her eyes. I need to talk to him. I already called him. He's on his way. And when he gets here, he's going to make the right choice for his daughter, even if it breaks his heart. Vivian moved toward the door, paused. For what it's worth, I almost believe you care about them. Almost. But caring isn't enough. Love is about sacrifice. And if you really love that little girl, you'll leave before she gets hurt any worse. Then she was gone, leaving Sienna alone in the study, the walls closing in. The next hour was a blur. Vivian left. Callum arrived, his face drawn. They argued in harsh whispers while Ivy was distracted with a movie. He defended Sienna. She defended their arrangement. But underneath it all was Vivian's threat. Tell Ivy the truth herself if they didn't end this now. I can't let her find out that way, Callum said finally, his voice hollow. From Vivian, angry and vindictive. It would destroy her. So what do we do? Sienna asked, even though she already knew the answer. You have to go. Today. Before Ivy gets home from school tomorrow. The words were a death sentence. Callum. Please. His voice broke. Don't make this harder than it already is. So she packed. Threw her few belongings into the same small bag she'd brought. Wrote a letter for Ivy that she rewrote 5 times because there were no words that would make this hurt less. Sometimes people who love you have to leave to keep you safe. But I'll never forget you. It was inadequate. Insufficient. But it was all she had. Callum drove her home. The silence in the car was the silence of a funeral. When they pulled up to her building, shabby and small and real, Sienna couldn't make herself open the door. I'm sorry, Callum said finally. For all of this. For asking you to do something that hurt you. I'm not sorry. The words came out fierce. I got to be loved by an incredible little girl for 2 weeks. That's worth whatever comes after. And us? What we? He gestured helplessly between them. There is no us. There never was. Just 2 broken people pretending for a little while that broken things could be whole. She opened the door, stepped out onto the curb. Paused. I hope you find someone real, Callum. Someone who can give you and Ivy what you deserve. What if what I deserve is you? The question hung in the air, impossible to answer. Because what she deserved was someone who'd chosen her first, not out of desperation. And what he deserved was someone who belonged in his world, who didn't come with an expiration date already stamped on their heart. Goodbye, Callum. She walked away before he could see her cry. Climbed 3 flights of stairs to an apartment that felt smaller and colder than ever. Sat on her bed and stared at the wall and wondered how you recover from loving people you were never meant to keep. In his car, Callum sat motionless. Stared at the steering wheel through tears that wouldn't stop. Then he slammed his fists against it, once, twice, until his hands ached and his throat was raw from sounds he couldn't hold back. He'd lost her. Lost the only woman who'd made him feel alive in 3 years. Lost her to protect his daughter. But as he drove home to an empty mansion, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just made the worst mistake of his life. The house had never felt more like a tomb. Callum sat in his office, staring at the painting Ivy had made, the family of 3 holding hands under a rainbow. 2 days since Sienna left. 2 days of going through the motions while everything inside him screamed that he'd made a catastrophic mistake. He heard the front door open. Ivy's voice calling out, bright with hope that made his chest constrict. Mama. I'm home. Miss Chin said my art project was the best in class and I want to show you. Her footsteps thundered up the stairs. Callum rose from his desk, his legs heavy as lead. He reached the hallway just as Ivy pushed open the guest room door. The empty guest room. Mama? Ivy's voice had gone small. Uncertain. She stepped inside, looked around at the bare surfaces, the stripped bed, the closet door hanging open to reveal nothing but empty hangers. Callum watched his daughter's face cycle through confusion, then understanding, then something that looked like the moment before a bone breaks. Where is she? Ivy turned to him, and the look in her eyes was the same one she'd had at 4 years old when he tried to explain why Mommy wasn't coming home from the hospital. Daddy, where's Mama? He knelt on the floor even though his knees protested. Reached for her hand but she pulled away, already knowing, already bracing for the blow. She had to go, sweetheart. What? Did I do something wrong? I'll be better, I promise. I'll clean my room and I won't complain about vegetables and... No, baby, no. This isn't about you. His voice cracked. She had to go because she wasn't really your mama. The words hung in the air like poison. Ivy stared at him. Blinked. Processed with the terrible clarity of children who haven't yet learned to lie to themselves. What do you mean she wasn't my mama? Callum's throat closed. He'd rehearsed this conversation 100 times in his head, but now that the moment was here, every word felt like swallowing glass. She was someone I asked to help us. Just for a little while. To make your birthday special. You asked her? Ivy's voice climbed. Like you paid her? Ivy. You paid someone to pretend to be my mother? Her bottom lip trembled and tears began streaming down her face. Was any of it real? When she read me stories? When she braided my hair? When she said she loved me? She did love you. She does love you. You're lying. The scream tore out of her, raw and agonized. You lied about Mama. You lied about everything. I thought she came back. I thought. She couldn't finish, dissolving into sobs that shook her whole small body. Callum tried to reach for her, but Ivy shoved him away with surprising strength. Don't touch me. You're a liar. I hate you. I hate you both. She ran to her room and slammed the door hard enough to rattle the walls. Callum heard the lock click, heard her throwing things, heard her crying with the kind of grief that comes from betrayal cutting deeper than simple loss. He stood in the hallway frozen, listening to his daughter fall apart, knowing he'd done this to her. He'd thought he was protecting her, giving her a gift. Instead, he taught her that even the people who claim to love you can't be trusted. The doorbell rang. Callum descended the stairs like a man walking to his execution. Opened the door to find Vivian, her expression hovering between satisfaction and something that might have been pity. I can hear her from outside, she said quietly. Get out. His voice was flat. Callum. You did this. You couldn't stand to see her happy, so you destroyed it. He stepped forward and Vivian actually took a step back. You used your own niece as a weapon to prove you were right. You didn't protect Ivy. You broke her just so you could tell me I told you so. I was trying to prevent exactly this. By making sure it happened on your terms? By threatening to tell her yourself if we didn't end it? Rage built in his chest, hot and clean and focused. You didn't care about sparing Ivy pain. You cared about being vindicated. About proving that your way was the only way. Vivian's face hardened. I'm not the one who hired a stranger to impersonate a dead woman. No, you're just the one who made sure that strangers' love meant nothing. Get out of my house. And don't come back until you can look at that little girl upstairs and honestly say you did what was best for her. He closed the door in her face. Leaned against it, breathing hard. Upstairs, Ivy's sobs had quieted to whimpers. But somehow the silence was worse. Sienna returned to work the next morning like someone sleepwalking. Tied her apron, took orders, wiped tables. The same motions she'd done for years, but now they felt like going through the motions of someone else's life. Her coworker Rochelle watched her with concerned eyes but said nothing for the first few hours. It was only during their break, sitting in the cramped back room, that she finally spoke. You want to talk about it? Nothing to talk about. Girl, you look like someone died. And I know for a fact you were gone for 2 weeks living some kind of Cinderella story. So either talk or I'm going to assume the worst and call someone. Sienna stared at her coffee cup. Watched steam rise and dissipate. I fell in love with a little girl. And her father. And I had to walk away. Had to. Or chose to. What's the difference? About 1,000 miles of heartbreak. Rochelle leaned forward. Running from love doesn't make it hurt less. Just makes you lonely. Trust me, I've tried both. You don't understand. Was a job. A contract. 2 weeks of pretending to be something I'm not. And somewhere in those 2 weeks the pretending stopped being pretend. Am I right? Sienna's throat tightened. She nodded. So why'd you leave? Because staying would have hurt them more. The little girl, Ivy, she'd already lost her real mother. How could I let her get more attached to someone who was never supposed to stay? But you wanted to stay. It wasn't a question. Sienna felt tears burning behind her eyes for what felt like the 1,000th time in 3 days. Wanting isn't enough. Wanting is everything. The question is whether you're brave enough to fight for it. That night, Sienna's phone pinged with a bank notification. She opened it, saw the deposit from Callum, $50,000 as promised. Stared at the number until it blurred. Blood money. Payment for breaking her own heart and a child's trust. She called the bank, transferred every penny to the children's hospital where Lorelei had died. Didn't leave a name, didn't want recognition. Just needed it gone, needed to not carry the weight of that transaction anymore. But getting rid of the money didn't get rid of the memories. Ivy's laugh. The feel of her small hand in Sienna's. Callum's eyes when he'd kissed her. The way the mansion had felt less like a museum and more like home. She lasted 4 days before she broke. At 3 in the morning she pulled out her phone. stared at Callum's contact. Her thumb hovered over the call button. She set the phone down. Picked it up. Set it down. What would she even say? I'm sorry I left? I'm sorry I can't stop thinking about you both? I'm sorry I fell in love with a life that was never meant to be mine? In the end she didn't call. Just lay in her too small bed in her too empty apartment and cried until she had nothing left. Callum stood outside Ivy's door for the third morning in a row. She hadn't come out except to use the bathroom. Refused to eat more than a few bites. Wouldn't talk to him beyond one-word answers that felt like shards of glass. He'd thought he knew grief. Had lived with it for 3 years after Lorelai died. But this was different. This was watching his daughter withdraw into herself, watching her light dim in real time, knowing he was the cause. Ivy? He knocked gently. Sweetheart, you need to eat something. Silence. I'm leaving a sandwich outside your door. Please. Just a few bites. More silence. Then, so quiet he almost missed it, go away. He pressed his forehead against the door. I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so sorry. No response. He left the sandwich and retreated to his office. Stared at his phone. Sienna's number was still in his contacts, but she'd blocked him. He tried calling twice, both times going straight to voicemail. Had typed and deleted 100 text messages that would never send. Maybe she was right. Maybe walking away was the kindest thing. Maybe he should let her move on, let Ivy heal, let all of them try to forget this ever happened. But then he remembered Sienna's face when Ivy had first called her mama. The pure, unfiltered joy mixed with terror. The way she'd held his daughter like she was something precious. The way she'd looked at him on the terrace, sharing wounds that had never healed. She'd loved them. Was probably still loving them wherever she was. And he'd let his fear drive her away. That evening, after another untouched meal left outside Ivy's door, Callum heard the lock click. He waited, barely breathing, as the door opened and his daughter emerged. She looked smaller somehow. Haunted. Her eyes were red-rimmed and swollen. Daddy? He knelt immediately, giving her the choice to come to him or not. Ivy took 2 hesitant steps. Then 3. Then collapsed into his arms and he held her while she cried fresh tears. I miss her, Ivy sobbed into his shoulder. Even if it was pretend. Even if she was lying. I miss her so much. I know, baby. I miss her too. Can we bring her back? The question broke him. I don't know if she'd come back. I don't know if I have the right to ask. Ivy pulled back, looked at him with devastating clarity. Did you love her? For real? He couldn't lie. Not anymore. Yes. Then you have to try. Her voice was fierce despite the tears. Mama Lorelai wouldn't want us to be sad forever. She'd want us to be happy. And Sienna made us happy. Made you happy. I saw it. Out of the mouths of children. What if she says no? Then at least you tried. Ivy wiped her nose on her sleeve. Please, Daddy. I don't care if she wasn't my real mama. She felt real. And that's what matters. The next morning, Callum made a decision that was either the bravest or most foolish thing he'd ever done. He found out where Sienna was working. A different cafe than the one where they'd first met, but close enough. Showed up during the lunch rush when the place was packed with people. Sienna was taking someone's order when he walked in. He saw the moment she registered his presence. Her hand froze mid-writing, her face went white, her eyes widened with something between hope and panic. He walked to the center of the cafe. Every step felt like walking through water. The conversations around him began to fade as people noticed something was happening. Then he dropped to one knee. The cafe went silent. Sienna stood behind the counter, gripping her notepad like a lifeline. Her coworker, Rochelle, he assumed from the name tag, nudged her forward. Sienna. His voice shook, but he didn't care. Let everyone hear. Let the whole world hear. I was a coward. I let fear and guilt and my sister's threats drive away the best thing that happened to us in 3 years. I told myself I was protecting Ivy. But the truth is I was protecting myself. From feeling again. From risking my heart again. From admitting that I'd fallen in love with you. Sienna's hand went to her mouth. Tears streamed down her face. Ivy's home right now, probably watching the clock until I get back to tell her if you said yes. She misses you. She told me she doesn't care if you weren't her biological mother. You felt real. And that's all that matters. He took a shaking breath. I love you. I love the way you braid her hair and burn pancakes and make terrible jokes. I love how you see beauty in broken things. I love that you donated the money because you never wanted payment. You wanted family. Around them, phones were out, recording. Rochelle was crying openly. The manager had emerged from the back but made no move to stop what was happening. Please, Callum said, his voice breaking completely. Please come home. Not as an employee. Not for 2 weeks. Forever. Be Ivy's mother. Be my wife. Be part of this messy, complicated, beautiful family we're trying to build. The silence stretched. Sienna stood frozen, tears falling unchecked. Then she stepped out from behind the counter. Walked toward him on shaking legs. Knelt so they were eye to eye. I was never pretending, she whispered. From the moment Ivy asked if I was her mama, from the moment you looked at me like I mattered, I was never pretending. He cupped her face in his hands, thumbs wiping away tears. Is that a yes? It's a yes. She laughed through her tears. It's a yes, you idiot. Take me home. The cafe erupted in applause and cheers. Rochelle shouted something about knowing it would work out. Someone yelled about believing in love. But Callum only heard Sienna, only saw her, only felt her hands gripping his shirt like she'd never let go. They kissed in the middle of a crowded cafe while strangers recorded what would probably end up going viral. And neither of them cared. Coming home wasn't triumphant. It was terrifying. Sienna stood in the foyer of the mansion, her small bag, the same one she'd packed when she left, feeling impossibly heavy. Callum stood beside her, his hand in hers, but she could feel the tension radiating off him. She might not want to see me, Sienna said quietly. She asked me to bring you home. But you're right, it might take time for her to trust again. They climbed the stairs together. Stopped outside Ivy's door. Callum knocked. Ivy Bean? There's someone here who wants to see you. The door opened slowly. Ivy stood there in pajamas even though it was early evening, her hair a mess, her rabbit clutched to her chest. Her eyes found Sienna, and her expression crumpled. You came back. It wasn't joy. It was accusation. Bang. Hope and fear warring for dominance. Sienna knelt slowly. Didn't reach out. Let Ivy have control. I came back. Are you going to leave again? The question was a knife. Not if you'll let me stay. Why should I believe you? You left before. You're right. I did. And I hurt you and I'm so sorry. Sienna's voice broke. I thought leaving would protect you. But all it did was hurt us both. So I'm here to tell you the truth, Ivy. All of it. And then you can decide if you want me to stay or go. Ivy's grip on the rabbit tightened. What truth? Your dad hired me to pretend to be your mother for your birthday. I needed the money. He needed to make you happy. It was supposed to be simple. But then I met you. Sienna's tears fell freely now. You showed me your drawings and told me about butterfly dragons and asked if I was really your mama. And when I said yes, it was the biggest lie and the deepest truth I've ever told. Because I wasn't your biological mother. But from that moment on, I wanted to be. Wanted it so badly it scared me. Ivy listened, processing, her face cycling through emotions too complex for a 7-year-old to fully understand. So you did lie, she said finally. I did. And lying was wrong. But my feelings for you? Those were never fake. Loving you was the realest thing I've ever done. Do you love me now? Or did it stop when you left? I loved you every second I was gone. Loved you so much it hurt to breathe. Ivy studied her for a long, agonizing moment. Then, can I still call you Mama? Sienna's breath caught. Do you want to? My first mama is in heaven. But you're here. And you make Daddy less sad. And you braid my hair better than he does. Ivy's bottom lip wobbled. If I call you Mama, will you promise not to leave again? I promise. For as long as you want me, I'll be here. It wasn't immediate. Ivy didn't run into her arms. Just stood there, considering, making Sienna earn every inch of trust. Then, slowly she stepped forward. Put her hand in Sienna's. Okay. You can stay. But if you leave again, I'll be really mad. That's fair. Over the next week they rebuilt. Slowly. Carefully. Sienna braided Ivy's hair in the mornings. Read stories at bedtime. Painted with her in the afternoons. Never pushed, never demanded, just showed up every day and let her presence be proof. Callum watched it happen with wonder and guilt in equal measure. Tried to apologize 100 times until Sienna finally pressed her fingers to his lips. Stop. We both made mistakes. We both ran when we should have fought. But we're here now. That's what matters. Late one night, 2 weeks after she'd returned, they sat on the terrace where they'd first shared their wounds. The city sparkled below, indifferent to their small human drama. Vivian's threatening legal action, Callum said quietly. Claims I'm emotionally unstable. That having you here is dangerous for Ivy. Sienna's hand found his. Then we fight her. It could get ugly. Court hearings. Investigations. Your past dragged through the mud.
Let her try. I'm not going anywhere. The court hearing happened on a gray morning that felt appropriately ominous. Vivian sat on one side with her lawyer, looking confident and cold. Callum, Sienna, and their lawyer sat on the other. The judge, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes, reviewed the documents with careful attention. Then she asked to speak to Ivy privately. Callum's hand tightened on Sienna's as they watched Ivy walk into the judge's chambers, small but brave. 15 minutes later, Ivy emerged, walked straight to Sienna and climbed into her lap. The judge returned to her bench. I've reviewed the case and spoken with the child. It's clear to me that Miss Thorne's concerns, while perhaps well-intentioned, are unfounded. The child is thriving. She's clear about the circumstances and her feelings. She understands that Ms. Reed is not her biological mother, but views her as a parental figure she's chosen. The judge's expression hardened as she looked at Vivian. Attempting to remove a stable, loving presence from a child's life out of personal disapproval is not in the child's best interest. Case dismissed. Miss Thorne, I'm warning you against any further interference. Vivian's face went white, then red. She stood abruptly and left without a word. Callum's exhale was shaky with relief. Sienna held Ivy tighter, buried her face in her curls, and tried not to cry in front of the court. 6 months later, the garden was transformed. White chairs arranged in neat rows. Flowers everywhere. Ivy had helped choose them all, insisting on rainbow colors because weddings should be happy, not boring. String lights hanging from the trees, ready to twinkle when evening fell. Sienna stood in the guest room, her old guest room, now a proper bedroom she shared with Callum, staring at herself in the mirror. The dress was simple, cream-colored, nothing like the elaborate gowns she'd seen in magazines. But it was hers. Chosen because she loved it, not because it fit someone else's expectations. Rochelle fussed with her hair. You ready for this? Last chance to back out and run away with me to Mexico. I'm ready. And she was. Terrified but ready. There was a soft knock on the door. Mama? Can I come in? Sienna's heart still stuttered at that word. Of course, sweetheart. Ivy entered in her flower girl dress, purple her choice with sparkles that caught the light. She stopped and stared. You look like a princess. You look like a princess, Sienna countered. We're both princesses. Daddy's going to cry when he sees you. Is he nervous? Super nervous. He changed his tie 3 times. Uncle Marcus had to help. Ivy moved closer, suddenly serious. Mama Sienna? She'd started adding Sienna to the name, her own way of honoring both mothers. Sienna had cried the first time she'd heard it. Yes, baby? Thank you for staying. For choosing us. Sienna knelt, careful of her dress, and pulled Ivy into a hug. Thank you for letting me. You're the bravest person I know. Even braver than Daddy? Way braver. The ceremony was small. Callum's parents had flown in, thrilled to see their son happy again. A handful of friends. Rochelle as maid of honor, crying before the processional even started. And Ivy, walking down the aisle ahead of Sienna, scattering petals with dramatic flair. When Sienna appeared, Callum's face did exactly what Ivy predicted, crumpled with emotion. He wiped his eyes roughly, not caring who saw. She walked to him without anyone giving her away. Because she'd already given herself. 6 months ago in a cafe. The night she'd first said yes. Every day since when she'd chosen to stay. The officiant began, but Sienna barely heard the words. Just looked at Callum, at Ivy standing beside them grinning, at the life they'd built from lies and desperation and impossible hope. When it came time for vows, Callum's voice was thick with emotion. I asked you to pretend to love us. To play a part for 2 weeks. But you showed me what real love looks like. Patient, brave, and unconditional. You took my broken family and loved us back to wholeness. You taught Ivy to laugh again. You taught me that it's okay to move forward without forgetting what came before. He paused, swallowing hard. Lorelei will always be part of our story. But you're our future. And I can't wait to spend the rest of my life loving you. Sienna's hands trembled as she held his. You didn't hire me to be your wife. You gave me a family to love when I thought I'd never have one. You gave me a daughter who teaches me every day what courage looks like. You gave me a home. Her voice broke. I choose you. Every day, every moment for the rest of my life. I choose us. The kiss was soft, reverent, witnessed by everyone who mattered. When they pulled apart, Ivy was between them immediately, hugging them both. Now we're a real family. Forever and ever. Forever and ever, they promised. That night, after the guests had left and Ivy had finally fallen asleep despite her sugar high, Callum and Sienna stood on the terrace. The same place where they'd first shared their scars. But now his arm was around her waist, and her head rested on his shoulder, and the weight of secrets had been replaced by the weight of joy. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't walked into that cafe?" Callum asked quietly. "Every day. And every day I'm grateful you did. Even with everything that happened? The lies, the pain? Especially because of that. Easy love isn't real love. Real love is choosing to stay when things fall apart. Fighting through the hard parts. Building something from the wreckage." She turned to look at him. "We earned this. All of us." He kissed her forehead. "I love you. I don't think I tell you that enough. You tell me every time you look at me. Every time you make terrible coffee and burn toast and let Ivy convince you to have ice cream for breakfast. That was one time. It was 3 times. He laughed, the sound easy and genuine. Then sobered. "Thank you. For coming back. For staying. For being exactly who we needed. Thank you for being desperate enough to beg a stranger in a cafe at midnight. Best worst decision you ever made. Best decision. Nothing worst about it." Somewhere inside Ivy was dreaming. Dreaming of butterfly dragons and rainbow families and a mama who'd come back and stayed. Dreaming without nightmares for the first time in years. And here on the terrace, 2 broken people who'd found each other in the most impossible way held each other and watched the city lights and knew, with absolute certainty, that they were home. Sometimes the love you never saw coming is the one that saves you. What started as 2 weeks of pretending became a lifetime of truth. 3 hearts, once shattered, now beating in sync. A family built not on biology or contracts, but on the fierce choice to love despite fear, despite pain, despite everything. And in the end, that choice made all the difference. If this story reminded you that love is worth fighting for, that broken things can heal, that second chances exist for those brave enough to take them, then maybe, just maybe, you'll remember that your own story isn't over yet. There's still time to choose love. Still time to be brave. Still time to find your way home. Because real love? It's always worth the risk.